Morning, everyone.
Good morning, folks. If you've been waiting to get in, feel free to jump on screen just so we can say hi to you. Want to welcome everybody back. Good to see some new faces and familiar faces. Happy Friday. I believe yesterday was National Dog Day. Did anybody participate in posting pictures of their pets yesterday? Maybe pop a thumbs up or a celebration on your reactions if you've had them. As everybody's getting let in here, we're just kind of taking a few moments to chit chat and say hi.
So while everyone's kind of trickling in still, you'll see I shared my screen and I just want to go over it so I can unshare it so we can all see better. But these are just some of the upcoming WAMP events and opportunities. So because conference is next month in September, which we're super excited for, and please still register. There's still plenty of room, but it's going to be talking about kind of critically deconstructing some of those well-known systemic theories in MFT practice. And Anthony's on here, I saw, so if he wants to say anything, you are welcome to jump in. Otherwise, because of that, we're going to skip Building a Better Us in September so that we can just have room for conference and any networking. And then we'll pick up with Building a Better Us, this virtual series on October 22nd. And there we're going to be talking about supporting military and veteran families, which I think with everything that's going on now is probably, again, like a really important topic. I think today is the last day. If you've been thinking about joining the board, we would love to have you for those applications to become a board, to run for a board member. And if you don't want to take in a board, but you're interested in committee work, let us know that as well, and we can kind of connect you to that committee. Finally, Rochelle made this beautiful slide and added on here that our holiday party this year is going to be a virtual holiday party, but we're going to be doing a virtual auction as well. And so if you have any items or experiences or services that you'd like to donate or know of someone or something that you could connect us to acquire some of those fun items for that auction, email us at wamp.wamp.org.
Yeah, and Billy, all of that goes to our scholarship fund for helping college students pay for classes and also sending members to conferences throughout the year.
And I think some of it may go also to advocacy, but I'd have to look specifically. Awesome. Well,
can I ask a question about the items?
Yeah,
please.
I wasn't involved last year. What kind of, like, what level of items are we talking about, and kind of what kind of things have done well before?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chasey. And at this point, what we can do is almost anything is totally, we want to ask for that. And then the auction committee can put things into packages. So it can be small items, it can be larger items. And when I say that, like little necklaces sometimes are great, all the way up to things like, hey, I have a vacation rental I can give out for a couple nights for a weekend adventure. So literally the world's our oyster. So if you've got something, let us know and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Thanks for that question.
We've also had people donate like books and, you know, like different books that might be helpful resources. So if you're wondering if you have something, yeah, reach out. We will be happy to chat with anyone about that. We actually didn't do the auction last year. We did a whole week-long membership appreciation and had prizes kind of throughout, but we're going to go back to the more traditional setting this year. So All right, well, to start out, since I'm talking, I'll introduce myself. I am Billy Tyler. I am the membership chair for WAMPT, and and under that umbrella is the networking task force, which is made up of Astrid and Rochelle, who will introduce themselves in a moment. But we really want to welcome you to our series of Building a Better Us, Community Conversations for Systemic Thinkers. We really designed these so we can share, learn, and connect over conversations on challenging topics around Washington State. We want to give those opportunities for inspiration, support, continued education, and connection with our Washington MFT community. I also want to let everyone know again about WAMPT, conference. So it really is going to be a pretty awesome event. So if you are available, and it's going to be virtual, sign up. It's going to be really awesome. And yeah, so I'm going to turn it over and oh wait, I missed something Rochelle made for me. If you want to be in the committee, I already did that. So, all right, Rochelle, you go ahead and take it all over.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Billy. Rochelle Pope over on the east side in Spokane. Thanks again for being here. Just want to remind everybody a couple Zoom tips. You are able to change the view on your screen if you would like to. We will be pinning our presenters today, our panelists, during the discussion, so it will kind of automatically do that for you. If you want to grab resources that are in the chat at the end, you can save the chat with that little file button. We will also get those posted online in the next couple weeks, but just keep that in mind. Due to our limited time frame, we do ask that all questions be submitted through the chat to be addressed during our panel Q&A. You can submit them to me directly or to the whole group if you'd like. And then during Q&A, I will run that portion and ask people to step on, or if you want to have your question asked but not step on, just let me know that information and I'll manage that for us. So, and if you have questions or anything happens in the middle of the event that you need help with, please just let me know. Again, feel free to direct message me in the chat. With that, I'm going to send it over to Astrid to kick us off today for today's Building a Better Us.
Thanks, Rochelle. So good morning, everyone. My name is Astrid Price. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm located on the outskirts of Tacoma and University Place. I am also your moderator for today. So we want to welcome everyone to today's conversation, Understanding Systemic Oppression in Schools and Defining Critical Race Theory. The hope for today is to provide a platform for discussion in regards to learning more about critical race theory, consider the possible blind spots surrounding CRT, and exploring how systemic oppression in schools relates to critical race theory. So this event will be a panel discussion, and the panelists have been assembled to help all of us learn, share, and connect in meaningful ways as systemic thinkers within this topic. I would like to thank Dr. Oscar Harris and Pia Alexander, LMFT, for participating as our panelists today. So our format will begin with each of our panelists answering prepared questions, followed by an open question and answer session with the questions that you guys submit in the chat, our attendees. So before we get to the questions, we would like to welcome the panelists and ask each one of them to briefly introduce themselves, including their location, their credentials, and scope of practice. And to start us off, let us welcome Oscar.
Well, hello, my name is Oscar Harris, and I currently reside in Spokane, Washington. I am the Chief Family and Community Engagement Officer for Spokane Public Schools. And I think what brings me to this circle is, first of all, I'm excited to be in the midst of practitioners who we as a school district have the opportunity to benefit from on a regular basis when our kids are present at school and when they're not, because I can just think about probably the instances of which you're probably working with our students and we're not even finding out about it, and working with families to help them to become more healthy. So I appreciate that. And yes, I'm grateful to be here. My background is, and my expertise, as some individuals will say, is with family and community engagement as it relates to school systems as well as other systems in the community at large.
Thank you. And next, I would like to introduce Pia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful to be here. I want to also just say thank you to Anthony Pennant, who is a fellow Antiochian, who introduced me to this panel experience. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I practice in Brooklyn, New York, in Williamsburg, and also in Long Island, New York. And I am a brand new faculty member at Antioch University, New England. So I'm extremely excited about that. And I'm excited about the fall semester that's going to be underway. And I'm also a doctoral student at Antioch in couple and family therapy. And I am at the very, 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 very tail end of the process. So before December, I may be joining Dr. Harris in being called Dr. Alexander. And so it's great to be here. In terms of my research, I do use critical race theory as my framework for a lot of my research. I also use intersectionality theory and use intersectionality as a critical social theory through which I frame my research. I've presented at a few conferences. One of the conferences that I think is most relevant to this experience is in 2019, just prior to going into fall 2020 and not being able, spring 2020 and not being able to do any more in-person conferences, I had the opportunity to go to the last in-person Critical Race Studies in Education Association conference and present there at USC. And that was an incredible experience. I definitely feel like it helped to ground me in the work. And also because of that experience, I was able to connect to the group that does the Critical Race Studies summer camp every summer. And we just concluded in July. So when I saw Billy and Rochelle and Astrick and Oscar for the first time in our pre-meeting to this, I was really hyped up about just the learning and knowledge and just being a voice to help present a balanced understanding of the theory. So again, it's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have all y'all here for sure. So I hope everyone has their pens and papers like I do, because we're about to jump into some really good topics today. So thank you again, Oscar and Pia, for your introductions. Okay, Pia, I'm going to start with you for the first question. Would you start us off with defining what critical race theory is and what it is not?
Yes, absolutely. So as we start this discussion, I definitely think it's important to kind of situate ourselves in how we're listening and engaging in the discussion. And we're all here on a clinical level. So the way that I might introduce this to a class or to a public forum or setting will be a little different. But there is one thing that I like to try to just do to remind myself of how I'm bringing myself to this work, which is to definitely engage with curiosity and see every point as an opportunity for connection, but also to create active space for groups relying on personal agency, collective advocacy, and authority. So in my class, that I teach diverse families and communities in couple and family therapy. And in my course, I try to make sure that in addition to the language that's out there in text, which uses marginalized, minority, oppressed, dominant, or marginalized, identified, or minority identified groups, I also like to use this phrase, which is just groups relying on personal agency, collective advocacy, and authority versus making space also for groups that are protected by the prevailing systems of oppression, power, and authority. So historically in this country, we know that those persons typically and historically have occupied cisgender white bodies. But if we look at the global context, those are not the only folks that have ever been involved in systems of power or hierarchy or oppression. So again, I like to make sure that this conversation is about groups and not about individuals. So that's how I like to start. I think it's really important that we kind of open up this conversation with a quote from Kimberly Crenshaw, mainly because I just came from the Critical Race Studies summer camp. And if you don't know who she is, She is a professor of law at UCLA, and she's also a visiting professor at Columbia University. So in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw published what is now her now famous academic paper that introduced the term intersectionality. And so intersectionality is grounded within critical race theory, and we're going to define critical race theory right now. But in the paper, if you'd like to read it, and I think it's important to everything that I mentioned today, I have just a wall of the text. They're all lined up, ready to show you and share with you. I also have one section today that I'm going to read specifically from the text, because I think part of this discussion and how we can talk about critical race theory is to make sure that we understand how we're not only producing knowledge, but how we're also sharing knowledge. And you're going to see online, as you see more and more folks that are in either teachers or clinicians or researchers, they're going to be online sharing things straight from the text. And I think that's where we have to have our knowledge, straight from the theorists, straight from the text. And so the paper that I want to suggest, if anyone wants to read more, because it defines also critical race theory in there, is Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. And I told Billy I'll share all these resources at the end. A Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. And so I think we have to think about theorists and theory versus opinionists. So critical race theory, number one, looks beyond individual acts of racism, looks beyond individual acts of bigotry, and instead it's a theory that grapples with structures and histories that have embedded racism into law and more broadly into our society. That's a direct quote from Kimberly Crenshaw in defining critical race theory. And so what this is important to note, and if there's only one thing that you take away from this whole talk today, critical race theory is not Marxism. So I'm going to say that again. Critical race theory is not Marxism. What it is and what it isn't. Critical race theory is a lens to examine power structures. And it's a critical social theory. It's not a political theory. So we have people in the political spectrum right now who may be using it as a political theory, and this is not going to be a political talk today for me. I'm going to be talking just theory. But if you hear it being used as a political theory, just note for yourself that you need to read more and learn more about it, because it's not a political theory. So that's really the difference that you may be able to articulate to others, that critical race theory is a social theory. And so before I go into any more about critical race theory and what it does, I want to know, do you want me to keep going, Astrid, or do you want me to pause? Because I can just go in a little bit more in depth.
Okay. Honestly, you can go ahead and go a little bit more in depth, and then I'm going to let Oscar join in as well. So
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, if Oscar's going to respond to the same question, do you want to go, Oscar, and then bounce it back to me? You're good? Okay.
No, Pia, continue.
Okay, great. So we left off with me telling you how critical race theory is a critical social theory. And so it was developed by Derek Bell at Harvard Law School, and some others, Delgado, Stefanik, and I'm going to really take you through the principal figures of critical race theory and who they are and how it came to be. And so what I want you to understand, again, when we're talking about what it is and what it's not, we've already established it's not Marxism. It's not socialism, but it's also not anti-racist theory. It's not just anti-racist theory. And it was not developed by Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And this is something that is being kind of melded in public media, that like, oh, Ibram X. Kendi's critical race theory. This theory was formed in 89, 90. This was way before this person who was around my age was out there in the field creating theories. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. So basically, in the seminal text on critical race theory, we know from Delgado and Stefanik, in addition to what Derek Bell had originally written and created, this was intended to be taught at the graduate level in law. So again, We're talking about something that is a graduate level theory, right? And the theory draws from European philosophers and theorists like Jacques Derrida. And so for those of us who are MFTs, CFTs, we know how Derrida's work is influenced in our postmodern theories, the foundational theories that we hold in our field as well, and Foucault as well. And so it was partially drawn from this European philosophy, but it was also drawn from the abolitionists and the activist movements here in the United States. And I'm going to use a word that's really used a lot when you talk about this theory. And I think it's the word that kind of sets some folks on edge, but it needs to be better defined and understood, which is radical activism. That word radical scares people. And so when you tell people that something is drawn from a radical activist theory, they tend to get very fearful of that. And meanwhile, let's talk about some of these radical activists, right? So in addition to the European philosophers that this theory was drawn from, we also have American abolitionists and activists. So for example, Sojourner Truth, who, by the way, was born into slavery, a Dutch woman, a Dutch enslaved woman. And in Ulster County, New York, she spoke Dutch. She did not speak English, but I know we all think about this, you know, over the years, of course, she learned English, but we think of her with this vernacular of this African-American English vernacular because of Ain't I a Woman? But how many of you were really taught, you know, this is someone who is one of our leading figures. This is abolitionist, women's rights activist, suffragist. She was a Union Army recruiter. She was a former correspondent. She was a correspondent of former President Abraham Lincoln. And how much do you really know about her? Did anybody know about her having a Dutch accent? Raise your hand if you did. I'm bringing that up on purpose because when we talk about questioning knowledge and we talk about why we have critical social theories and why these theories come up in education, it's because it's important for us as we learn our history, even as we learn our history about leading Americans, that we know the full history. And that we don't stop where the system has us stop. So critical race theory draws from Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., another person whose legacy has been being misappropriated right now to extol colorblind ideology, when really his views were not aligned with colorblind ideology. And when he died, he was largely despised and very unpopular with those groups that I mentioned before, which are groups that are protected by prevailing systems of oppression, power, and authority. So it's important to note this, the same thing for Sojourner Truth, because as this critical race theory was formed, in addition to drawing from radical movements, Dolores Huerta, Chicano power, and agricultural movements of the 60s and 70s, this is all part of the fabric of critical race theory. So as we return to thinking about Jacques Derrida and Foucault and their philosophical approach to understanding culture and society, that forms the framework of so much of our systemic and relational therapeutic models. And so it's a natural connection that as systemic thinkers and postmodern thinkers for some of us, unless you're a modern thinker and you're like, I'm all about the structural family therapy and I'm staying in the modern, but whatever it is, I was trained in structural also, but whatever it is, that, or relational thinkers as MFTs and CFTs, we really can understand that we can see some similar critical theories and frameworks that we can situate our research in and our learning in, that is also part of critical race theory. Oscar, I'm going to hand it over to you and then it can come back to me later.
Yeah, Oscar, I was going to have you jump in here, and like Pia, you make such a thank you for laying that foundation, number one, because like, you know, we need a definition there. And then also in regards to like, I'm with you with the whole, like, do your research, know in regards to the history and stuff like that, because when the hype is real here in society, that's a lot of times what people flock to instead of taking a pause, breathe, and be like, you know what, let's do some research on this. And so Oscar, I want to get your voice in here too, like anything that you want to add to what Pia said or what has sparked your thoughts in this.
Well, I really just want to say amen. First of all, that's really what I wanted to do as it relates to what Pia shared, because I mean, not only did she bring the historical perspective to help ground us, But she also, I think, really talked about the fact that you have something that is being misappropriated, recodified to try to be placed into a sphere to where it don't belong, and openly to try to produce, well, it's successfully doing it, to produce this fear-mongering type thing, phenomenon that we've been dealing with for a while. And I think what has made our society susceptible to it is, we've been dealing with a pandemic for, over a year right now, and on the eve of going into another pandemic, right? A lot of physicians are saying that, guess what? This is like not the same pandemic. We're possibly doing number 2. So you're having individuals who are pretty much have been isolated, who have lived in a constant state of fear as it relates to their health. And then what has happened, unfortunately, I see within the political sphere, is that individuals who are about winning and losing and capturing power, or definitely not trying to give it away, are trying to monopolize on the opportunity, use fear to actually bring forth an ideal or a concept that is inaccurate, and openly individuals are not being put into a place and being encouraged to do their research, right? I was thinking about it. There are so many social media scholars right now to where we have a plethora of information that is coming to us that we can access in any given time. We can go on any of the social media platform and find someone who agrees with us, someone who disagrees with us. And if we're looking for a cause to get behind, you just got to go there. I mean, whether it's going to be any of the cause out right now, or march around the block with one sock on movement. In any kind of movement you want to be a part of, you can be a part of by connecting to what's happening with social media. And so whenever we have, and it's not only social media, because I think there are some great things happening, but I think individuals are being sheltered away from information, and fears are being capitalized on, and very much so. To stop on this topic, I can talk, what I speculate the fears are coming from, they're coming from, something that's built within the fabric of our nation and our culture. That's why the fears are able to take off. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that a little later. But again, I just want to listen to Pia and Astrid.
And listen, I know you said we could talk about it a little bit later. Actually, this next question go right to you, Oscar. So why is this the buzz right now? Like, could you share your insight and experience with like what is happening with students and families, or even some things that parents are asking or sharing when they do reach out to you at school? Like, tell us what's been going on.
Well, probably similar to many other school districts, individuals are reaching out and they're asking the question, are you teaching CRT in school? And we have staff who is worn down by saying, no, it's not possible to do that. No, and and what is coming from is coming again from the misappropriation that's linked to a fear. And what I have to be candid and blunted, what they're saying, are you teaching CRT? But really what they're saying is, am I going to send my student to school who may not be coming from a cultural identity that's being raised up in media right now? And are you going to teach them to feel guilty about their heritage? They're not saying that, but that's what they're asking. Are you going to teach them to feel guilty about their heritage and guilty about their history and all of that, and openly begin to start sharing with them that, not only have people of color been oppressed, but it's time for a reformation or a reckoning to happening? People ain't saying that, but that's what people are thinking. And so when we begin to start thinking about how we navigate that, and I can say as a school district, one thing that, I think we're fortunate to have is we have to remain in discourse with everyone. I think that is something that is missing. We have so many individuals that are dropping fallacy bombs, dropping all kind of misinformation, and they're disappearing, right? They're stirring pots and they're disappearing. And examples of that, we have some very skillful individuals who are taking phone calls and they're asking questions about CRT. And one of the first questions that they may ask is, okay, tell us more about CRT. And normally the phone is hung up on them, right? Because they're like, well, I heard on social media, I heard from a neighbor that this is happening. And it's like, you can't even define what it is. So how can it be an issue? But again, that is what's necessary And that is what's part of the cultural element that I think we are in right now. And I think we've been in this place probably for over 10 years in terms of it's okay to remain ignorant or leverage your privilege to remain ignorant. We've been in that era for a while right now, because it's the individuals who are asking about CRT. I'll say many to most are fairly intelligent individuals. It's just that some are accessing their privilege to remain ignorant. So as a school district, definitely our commitment is to be in there and continue to produce an atmosphere of which healthy discourse can happen. But it has to be healthy discourse, and individuals have to stay present to have the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's interesting that you mentioned that about like that one sentence of parents coming up to you, are you guys teaching this? Are you guys you know, that common question coming up? And like even in like in my other job that I have working with students, and then like having friends who are teachers, like I had to go to my friends and be like, so is CRT happening or not? And they're just like, if it is, we don't even know. You know what I'm saying? And so like, it's really interesting on all these different angles of where this is coming from, of is it happening, if it's not happening. And then once again, not taking the time to be like, the school year is literally starting now. We're not going to just throw something in there without doing the research behind it. Pia, I would love to hear your thoughts about this question as well, or anything you want to add.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I think that we have to make sure that we, in this space, have the names of theorists to go to that are presently and actively engaging in this work, right? Who are the ones who are writing and researching, because if you just go on Amazon or somewhere, you put in critical race theory, you may get books from people who aren't theorists in the theory, but are sharing their opinions. And that's why I think theorists versus opinionists. So I'm going to give you a few names. Kimberly Crenshaw, Devon Carbado, and that's Devon, Carbado. Sumi Cho, SUM like Mary, I, Cho. Luke Charles Harris, and Daniel Martinez Hosang. And Hosang is capital H, small o, and then same word, capital S, A-N-G. So these are scholar researchers, many are attorneys, some are practitioners who are actually engaged in the work. And I think if there's something that you can share, if folks are actually, wondering like, well, why is it that this keeps coming up? Or what do I say? Critical race theory is an approach to studying law. So that's just basic and clear, right? Now, critical race theory has been applied to other professional fields, including research on education practices and couple and family therapy at the graduate level. So I think that's the most important thing. And it is not being taught at K through 12 level. And unfortunately, if there is a perception that someone's child has been, emotionally distraught because of hearing about race, then to me, that speaks to the greater need in that system to look at itself and create an equitable and languageable curriculum and rubric for teachers to be able to follow. And sometimes where I see our space as systems thinkers, right? We're not just clinicians, we can be systems consultants in this relational and systemic thinking that we do. This understanding of we have a skill set of being able to language things in a way that can be helpful and not harmful. So to be able to open up dialogues, maybe if there's a school environment where a process needs to happen, where people need to be speaking, administration and teachers, that there's a way for us to be more part of that conversation. But critical race theory is an approach to studying law and other professional fields at the graduate level. And the questions that critical race theorists ask are, number one, what are the ways that the law has upheld systems of inequality or racist practices? And number two, critical race theory proposes solutions for further examining these potential solutions, be it through research, be it through discussions, open, active participation and dialogue and discourse with folks. And so I think that's so important to understand too, because there are so many folks that think this is a thing to be afraid of, because as Oscar has mentioned, that's what the propaganda is going on out there. And people are human. We respond. We've been in this, as he was saying, we respond to those things. And so what we really need to do is to understand how to clearly and definitively make the connection between this is a theory, that's an approach, it's a lens, it's a way to see things. It is not a politic. It is not a way that the school is going to be governed. And I'll give you another name, Gloria Ladson Billings, L-A-D-S like Sam, O-N like now, Billings. Gloria Ladson Billings is the genius educator who years ago said, let's figure out how critical race theory can be applied to understanding better ways of teaching teachers, not going into school and teaching the little children in K through 12. How do we teach the teachers? How do we teach academicians to look at our power structures and figure out why are there only two, persons of color or persons that identify in different ways in my cohorts? Why is there no one on the leadership of my university that reflects the actual students? Or in other, teachers teaching teachers ways. And so that's important for us to note too. Well, why are we talking about this in education? Well, because there were educators decades ago who wanted to question, who wanted to look at how we teach ourselves these things. And so that's another thing to be able to language and mention to people.
Absolutely. And thank you for all those names, to add on to it. And it's really interesting because as we move along here, this next question is going to go on the other side of the table of part of our discussion today in regards to systemic oppression. So, the question is, how does systemic oppression apply to MFTs, mental health, and to public education? And to kick this question off, I'll go ahead and start, just looking at my own experience as an LMFT and working with students K through 5 right now. But I've also had my experiences with middle schoolers and high schoolers as well. And so when it comes to what they have learned in the school, and then when I have them in my sessions, and some of the conversations that come about of questions about different things of what has happened in the past, but it also has changed. I've also had experiences of conversations with students in regards of having that feeling of man, we are always meeting people, my clients of color, saying, man, we have always been pushed down, or we are always having to go the hard route. And why is this? And why is this going on like that? And so when it comes up in sessions that I have, no matter what the age is, and even with the adults, I think it's important to have these conversations in these sessions, because number one, we're supposed to allow space for our clients to talk about whatever it is that is bothering them, but also to be able, if you have that opportunity, to help out with educating in some way when it comes to staff and along those lines. If you have opportunities to do that, to also take it that way too, because you have staff members who are teaching our kiddos and who may also lack some information that's really, really needed. And so that's just one of many examples of what I have experienced. And I know it's kind of vague, but at the same time, I want to hear, I'll go back to you, Pia, in regards to how does systemic oppression apply to MFT in your eyes, and to public education? Then I'll jump it over to you, Oscar.
Ooh, that's some question. Yes. So, well, first and foremost, we know that whenever you're going to talk about something that relates to social justice, there will be pushback. And anytime you're talking about something that actually relates to justice, there are questions. The whole justice system is about questions, right? The whole legal system is about questions. So it's almost counterintuitive to not embrace for all of us that there will be questions when we talk about these things. And so many legal areas that relate specifically to systems of power and structures that surround all persons, right, which is what we're looking at as clinicians, there are significant challenges that are inherent in creating like equality for all, especially when the systems and the structures around us have structural inequalities or there's structural racism. And that's where the challenges begin, sort of this conflating of challenging structures of power versus, inequity. So for example, health inequities. Let's think about larger surrounding systems, education, hospitals. When you're talking about questioning systems of power through a lens, any type of lens, or particularly a social justice lens or a theory that has a social justice lens, we are very conscious as clinicians that we are not shaming or blaming individuals within those systems of care, especially not children, right? Where we are, or any clients or anyone in general, we're looking at systems and we're looking at communities. So let's talk about specifically family therapy. I'm going to give you another name and another book that I think folks have, if you haven't already needed to read this as part of your foundational theories. I know I'm teaching this. This text is going to be used in my foundational theories course this semester. Socioculturally Attuned Family Therapy by McDowell, Martin, and Bermudez. This is such an important work. But prior to this work, in 2015, Teresa McDowell wrote a book that was called Applying Critical Social Theories to Family Therapy Practice. And within that text, there is an entire chapter on critical race theory, critical social theories, and how that applies. So let me tell you how it connects. Critical race theorists, we share a commitment to social justice and racial equality. So generally, there's an agreement within critical race theory that racism and that privilege are systemic, they're institutionalized, and they're a normal everyday aspect of life that folks are going to experience. And it's not our role as a clinician to question what someone brings in, but to just address it when it comes in, to work with it when it comes into the space. And so the second sort of tenet that's in critical race theory that also applies to our work is that race is a social construction, right? But it's a social construction that has real material consequences. And that's a direct quote from Teresa McDowell. And I love that she puts it that way. It's a social construction, but with material consequences. And so this is one of the harder concepts for folks to grasp sometimes outside of our field. But generally in our field, we know that human beings create ideas about what race means, and that these racial conceptualizations have changed over time, and that generally we know they've shifted across multiple contexts, right? So since we have a lot of postmodern theories in our field, we know that that's something that we sort of embrace if we embrace that postmodern perspective. But because it is so challenging to work with, we really have to understand that, amplifying marginalized voices is part of what we do. If you look at the AAMFT Code of Ethics, it's built into the Code of Ethics. And so there is language built into the Code of Ethics that says we have a responsibility to just create a more equitable circumstance for our communities, which will ultimately extend to our clients. It does not say that we have to challenge racism at every turn in these specific ways. It's not outlined in those ways. It's a broader interpretive theory. And that's why critical race theory aligns so well. The last thing I'll say about this is that we know as clinicians, we already highlight and unpack all types of processes around systems of power. That's what we do. We unpack things about privilege, oppression, whatever happens to our clients in our communities. We've become much more culturally responsive as a field. We've become much more attuned to all those intersectional aspects of identity. And we also have started to show more humility in our work. And that's so important, that even for those of us who are working with theories or trying to use theories in our research, that we also show humility. and that we also recognize that questioning happens on both sides.
Absolutely. And before I tag in Oscar here, I will definitely like to say that even in the experiences that I've had with my clients, I tell my clients all the time, although I'm here to help you during this journey, you are helping me in so many different ways as well. And so it enriches me as a therapist as well, because I don't know everything, even as being a Black female, you know what I'm saying? And so it's the more that we can get into this rhythm of, instead of just I'm a therapist, I'm up here, you're the client, you're down here. As long as we see this as a two-way street and know that there is a learning lesson in every single session that you have with the client or with a family at the school, or there is always a learning opportunity. You are always a student, no matter what age you are, type of deal. And I honestly believe that that needs to be said more and more and more to be able to have a change or a shift, I should say, of growth within our not only education, but also our field. And so, Oscar, slap hands to you, tag, you're it. What would you like to add on to that?
Well, just saying that, it's when we talk about public education, right? We talk about something that's considered a fundamental right, something that is protected, according to federal laws and et cetera. I think oftentimes what we're challenged with when we begin to start talking about a public education system is that it's a public school, well, no matter what the school is, it's a microcosm for what's happening in the community. So whatever's in the community is in the school. And so whatever's in the school, whatever's ailing parents at home, whatever's ailing students, is going to be ailing everyone. So I say one thing that I'm guilty of is being a triumphalist. I don't even know if that's a word, but I believe that we have the opportunity to be able to take something that can be so challenging and end up turning it into something beautiful. I was able to be a practitioner years ago, but I can't claim that status because I don't want to degrade or defame anything that you're doing. But I would say something that I have recognized and I have noticed is, even to your point, Astrid, is that as long as we can keep talking about the us versus the other, we position ourselves into a place to where not only can we address the power structures that exist, but we can do it in a way that's going to allow for us to co-create what we keep talking about, that we want. I've heard so many individuals, right, no matter where they was at on the continuum, to talk about ultimately the future that they wanted for their children or their children's children. And they weren't too much different from across, no matter what the ethnic group was, the socioeconomic status, it was not different. It differed in, one, the understanding and perception of how we would get there, and the understanding and the perception of how do we address mechanisms that have been put in place to keep certain individuals oppressed, right? How do we be honest, have honest conversations and say that things like an example, how do we say within no matter what system, Pia talked about it earlier, we're at a place where people are not talking about disproportionality as much as they were, but every system is dealing with disproportionality. All the data is linked to it. And so something that is exciting, individuals are having conversations about it. I think when individuals are having conversations about it, it has to be the us, because I see us oftentimes dealing with this continuum or a polarizing type effect all the time. It's either you're all in or you're all out. No, how do we pull you to a place in the middle? Education happens in the middle. Education don't happen at the opposite end of the spectrum. And when you pull individuals to the middle, you can begin to start educating. You can begin to start putting a human face to what is actually taking place, because we're talking about human doing, or how have we been with human being, right? We are in the midst of this, I'll say, as the public education system. I feel fortunate to be a part of the school system that we're in. with the things that we have been able to do over the last year. But it definitely was a Herculean lift. But what helped us to even begin to start accomplishing some of the things is being able to have community with us, being able to have therapists with us, being able to sometimes pull staff along with us. And when we find somebody who's resistive, you know, we don't denounce and we don't cancel out their humanity, right? We don't say that they're all extremists over here, but what we say is that, you know what? They're at a place where they choose to be. But at the end of the day, our kids deserve better. Our communities deserve better. And since they deserve better, what does better look like? And how do we make sure we move forward with that better? And I'll say again, it has to be working with the us. And so as I am individuals will reach out to me, teachers that may not identify of being of a cultural heritage, which everybody has the cultural heritage, right? They may not identify with having one, and they ask me, how do I have a conversation about race? And I tell them it's quite simple. First of all, you need to have an apologetic stance. You need to, as soon as you start the conversation, you need to say, I am ignorant and I am going to step in it, and I give you full permission to help me as I step in it. And then as I step in it, I'm going to take a mental note and I won't go there ever again. And I will share it with them is that, because one thing that you're going to discover, and this is often when I began to start looking at communities that have been deemed communities of color, is that when you begin to start thinking about humanity, when you begin to start thinking about leading with the heart, it's very much so part of the core. Very much forgiveness, right? Those types of elements are part of the core, and you get to mess up. I think that's something we have to put out there. You get to get it wrong. So specialize in what do it mean to repair. So I tell individuals, double down on getting professional development on what it means to repair. How do you have courageous conversation? How do you own part, and how do you recognize when you've been guilty? Those are all the things that I'm constantly teaching individuals as it relates to what's going on, because it's only a matter of when. I personally have stepped in it with other cultures. It just so happens I prize myself on being able to authentically repair things. So that's what keeps me in dialogue. And so that's what I would say. Anytime we're working with families connected to public schools, being able to say that, you know, we're all in this, and it's going to be challenging. It's going to be struggling, but stay in it, right? Stay in the conversation.
Exactly. You're going to have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. You know, life throws so much stuff at us. You can't just put up the white flag every single time something pops up, you know what I'm saying? And so it's like, the not only awareness, but taking responsibility and also taking actions to better yourself as a person. Because like you said, we are all in this together for sure. I do want to remind our attendees that the chat box is open for questions, because we do have a segment for you to ask questions to our panelists. We are talking about a lot of great stuff during this time, and I want to make sure to hear the voices of our attendees too, whether if you want to put it in the chat or you can shoot it straight over to Rochelle directly. But either way, we want to hear if you have any questions. And so as we continue to move along, Oscar, so still to this day, these two topics when it comes to systemic oppression and CRT are being politicized and stirring up a lot of emotions, as we've all been talking about so far today. So what are the impacts of this polarization, would you say?
I would say it creates a situation or an environment to where individuals don't know how to speak, don't know how to, because of the level of fear, right? There are individuals who genuinely are interested in knowing more about what's going on, but they're afraid of the fear. We are dealing with, I would say from my observation, we're dealing with a sense of this mob mentality going on, right? Having individuals together, many of which are, you know, they wouldn't go along, except that they done got with a group of individuals who are sharing misinformation and et cetera. I think whenever we look at it, like I said again, that polarization, that's what happened. I have to choose a side, not realizing you should be thoroughly knowledgeable about both sides, right? That's the only way you're going to be able to dwell in the middle and help individuals on the outside, no matter what extreme level that they go to. So when I look at it, primarily thinking about it from the school system, or me being in highly contentious environments, I am constantly drawn to the place of walking in that environment and trying to suspend judgment as much as possible, right? And so individuals can feel comfortable coming up to me and talking about a various amount of individuals. You know, like if someone come up to me and asks me the question, why does race matter so much? Why do we have to talk about it? And I would say something like, you know, that is a great question. You know, share more with me. Right? Help me understand where the fear is coming from, possibly. Help me understand how you're naturally curious about it. Because that's going to help me to position myself. Because I think something that I haven't shared with the group, maybe you picked up on it yet, but my Southern vernacular pops out, which I'm proud of, right? Being a Southerner, right, born and raised in the South, yet living in the Pacific Northwest, have given me an opportunity to view race, culture, in a way that I've come to think of is very much a strength for me. Because within a region like Spokane, Pacific Northwest, topics around race are very interesting in comparison to the South, right? Because we mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, brother-in-laws, mixed races, that's common within our area. Then I'll say in many parts in the South that I'm familiar with. So we have an opportunity, I'll say, to stay in conversation. And these types of things have helped me, because the more I hear and understand where the people that I'm working with, the more I'm able to grow. Astrid mentioned it earlier. Whenever, I believe personally, whenever we get to the place to where we can no longer grow around these particular topics, we're doomed. I mean, whether we're the professional or not, we're doomed if we do not stay in conversation and continue to learn.
Absolutely, yes. Pia, I want to open it up to you for you to jump in on this, of your thoughts on why this what are the impacts of the polarization in regards to politicizing these two topics and stirring up all the emotions.
Yes, I think that I'll take it back to questioning. When we don't know, when we don't have a basis of knowledge that we can trust around what things mean, it just creates fear, right? So we've been languaging all these different ways, but I think one of the things that we don't really have enough knowledge on is, if I asked right now in this setting, someone tell me the 3 outcomes of the civil rights movement, period. What were the 3 outcomes? Without Googling, would you be able to just rattle them right off the top of your head? And I think that's a challenge, that we don't even know where we've come from and what we've come to. So how can we already push back at theories that we don't even know how they're applied or what they're applied for, right? We have the Civil Rights Act, right? Anybody know what that did? I hope everybody does. Outlawed segregation. Otherwise, my family would still be on the back of the bus somewhere. And so this is interesting too. I'm privy to a lot of discussions and conversations, because depending on what season it is, depending on how I have my hair that day, depending on where people see me or know me, I, in some instances, am more white passing. And so people tend to say things around me having not knowing. It's like that time that someone said to I think it was Rashida Jones, "You look very ethnic today." And she's like, "Well, that's because I'm Black." But they were like, "You look very tan. You look so ethnic today." And I'm like, yeah. So I think it's interesting, because I'm privy to a lot of things. I hear a lot of things. And at the same time, one of the things that I hear is a fear about talking to folks that are not like them. And so if we understand, well, this is what happened after the Civil Rights Movement. We got the Civil Rights Act, right? We got the Voting Rights Act, which we know is being challenged right now as we all sit here and as we speak, right? We know we got the Fair Housing Act, we got the Equal Opportunity Act, we got this. But the reason why critical race theory was being talked about by these legal scholars at Harvard, and why they were there diving in and grappling with this, was because post-civil rights movement, all of these changes that were happening in terms of these various acts didn't necessarily change people's day-to-day lives with some of the ongoing institutionalized racism. It just didn't. And so this is similar to what Oscar was saying. There was a reason why there was a new way that needed to be developed to look at these laws and practices and say, are there more solutions there? What can we do? And so when people get emotional, I try to also say to them, you know what really helps? Just go reread some history, do some things. And I try to point them to relevant texts. that are actually great texts. I try to point them to, texts that you can trust because they were developed by a bunch of people, like what Oscar is saying, the collective, having this collective brain trust of folks. I tell folks, this is a book that is taught in my course, and this book is just amazing. The editor of this, I believe she just passed away, Marian Adams, or recently, but Readings for Diversity and Social Justice. This book is incredible. I never even heard of this book until I had to teach the course. And then I was like, why wasn't I taught this in my MFT, master's program? Or why didn't I, even in my doc program, because it would have been assumed that we would have learned this in the master's program, right? It is just amazing. I mean, it really breaks down, it helps you to understand classism. It helps you understand all the isms, but it also does it in a way that's not blaming or shaming. That's what we need to also come back to, that we've talked about, this idea of learning with a collective, empathetic approach.
Absolutely. Pia, you mentioned one of the talks that we had earlier in regards to something else very interesting that I would love for you to dive a little bit deeper into. So you talk about accomplices versus allies. So what do you see as being the next step or stage of addressing systemic oppression, and then especially in regards to that whole phrase of accomplices versus allies? What do you mean by that?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, because I definitely feel like, especially since in family therapy, we have this growing emphasis on witnessing stories and really understanding how folks who are not from that protected power structure engage with others. There's this talk of allyship, ally, and people are like, I'm an ally, he's an ally, she's an ally, we're all allies, they're allies, everyone's an ally. I think and I didn't come up with this, so I'll just put it right out there, but I'm coming up with other words as well, and that's the fun task I want to place on this group. What are some other words that we can think of that are not just allies, right? Because an ally is more of a label. People are like, I'm an ally, but it doesn't necessarily encompass, unless people are really doing the work and really trying to understand how to define allyship. It's another one of those phrases that's kind of been co-opted by the larger, social structure to say, oh, that just means that you're like kind of anti-racist, but what do you do? So this idea of being an accomplice or being a collaborator in the work, right? I'm a collaborator, I'm an accomplice to justice and to socially just practice. It means a few different things. It means that I'm not just saying it, there's some risk involved. What am I risking? If I'm risking nothing, then what actually am I doing? There's no risk. There's no risk to me professionally. There's no risk to me personally. And I don't want anyone to put themselves at personal risk. But when you go out to protest, that's personal risk, right? When you stand up for yourself, and especially in the space that we're in right now, when someone says something and someone stands up for themselves or stands up for someone else, that could be putting yourself at risk. But when you're doing certain types of research, that puts you at risk. And I think being a critical race scholar now puts you at risk. It puts you at risk of having someone come to you and be like, critical race theory is terrible. What does it mean? And so hopefully now you can language it a little bit more or articulate a little bit more like what it does mean. But I think that's something that we need to further develop. I think allyship is a little bit limited. This is my personal opinion. And that there needs to be a little bit more, a word that really encompasses what it means to take a risk. I don't think about those folks that went down south and were not Black and put themselves, and you know who I'm talking about, I hope, and put themselves at personal risk. And some of them did not come back because they wanted to make sure that civil rights wasn't just a thing that only related to Black folks, but that it was a thing that related to everyone, and that we all were able to live together and not stay in this Jim Crow era forever. And unfortunately, there's risk that we don't realize can be smaller risks. Do you speak up when someone says something in a meeting or in a group supervision? Especially when people consider themselves to be progressive or even liberal, and not necessarily even in their politics, but maybe in their ethics or however they're identifying their value system. Robin DiAngelo, who many people know and associate with the book White Privilege, but she wrote another book that I think is really helpful for folks. I read it. I have it here, but I don't know what I did with it. I didn't have it in the list of the books that I want to share with you, but it's called Nice Racism. And it's about how progressive folks can still kind of look at ourselves and question how we're showing up. And I think that's important. And I think there will soon be a book similarly for persons who are relying on that personal agency, collective authority, or collective advocacy, who are not part of the protected power structure. I think there's going to be a book for us as well that someone needs to write. I don't have time to write it, but about how we relate to gender and sexuality. Maybe some of them are out there, but I think we need some more. We need more knowledge on that, of how we can check our own biases around that for those who have them. So that's my stance. Be an accomplice, be a collaborator, be a co-conspirator to justice, be to good work, as opposed to just an ally.
So good. And I don't know if y'all caught that. Pia just dropped the seed for somebody to do a book. So if that hits your heart and if that hits your soul, I'm going to need you to go ahead and make action on that. I'm just going to say that right now. I don't know who you are, but I believe you are in this group, or you can hear my voice wherever you are at. To honor time, I'm going to go into the next one, Oscar. And also, when we all met before, you mentioned something that we want to highlight on the notion of preventing soul wounds. So how can clinicians use this information to support community care? Any resources that you suggest, but then also, highlighting that part of preventing soul wounds.
Right. I think to kind of talk about the soul wound a little bit is I started using the phrase soul wound probably, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, when I was actually trying to explain to, individuals, why does it appear that some individuals are unable to move past being called a racial epithet or anything like that. And I share it because it literally wounds their soul. I mean, it's something that haunts their dreams. It's something that they are constantly thinking about. Their emotions won't let go and their brain won't let go of it because it's a threat to internally what's happening with my emotional makeup, my mental makeup, and to where I walk around with it. And I share how when people experience microaggressions, right, that's a soul wound. And so when we begin to start talking about how individuals can help prevent them, I'll say is, first of all, knowing about them, learning about them. I gave forth that information briefly and as simplistically as possible, just so you'll know. When someone talked to you about, said, they call me this, or they call me this name, or they shrugged me off, or when I was in the line, they called people to go ahead of me, right? Or I got different treatment when I was at the TSA at the airport. So you will know that you can actually say, oh, this is someone who has been assaulted, right? And it can't be proven, right, in the court of law and all of that. And so I think something that can happen is you can partly educating yourself is one thing that can help. But I say also, when you meet individuals who have experienced it, being able to let them know that you are present with them, being able to do the proper response when they tell you someone called them this, you'll be surprised the amount of healing that will take place. Another thing that is very important when you're meeting with someone, and I make sure that I try to share this with anyone, if anyone share with you in confidence that they have been discriminated against, they feel like they don't know if they've been discriminated against, but they feel bad about how they was treated, you being able to sit there and validate their pain or whatever they're going through, and also have a plan in mind to where if it seems like they've lost a sense of their humanity, it can be restored immediately. So one thing that I do, if I talk to anyone, whether it's family or anybody, and they tell me about an incidence of racism, I sit and I listen and I pay attention. And after I'm done, I am going to double the amount of encouragement, the validation, all of that back into them. If they say that this happened, this person made them feel less than, I say, well, first of all, what is your last name? Where did you come from? What are you proud of in your family heritage? What is going on? I need for you to go there and think about that a little bit, because yes, unfortunately, and I'm so sorry that this happened to you, but you are a champion, right? You're going to be something great, because it's something, if we could actually track the amount of individuals, the amount of students who have had soul wounds that have prevented them from becoming the next top leading brain scientists and next architects and all of that, it would probably be astonishing to us. So as practitioners, I think you have a great opportunity to, first of all, be there with them, but don't let them stay there by themselves. And if you're one you're becoming more proficient in this area, I know that there are certain confidentiality laws and different things you have to navigate, but I would also say if you absolutely have to, start trying to discover and locate a cultural broker. If you look up cultural broker, it is a term that is quite old, but get you a cultural broker, someone who can sit down with you and say, okay, when they say it this, it means this, 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 and this is how you can go about helping them to become better.
Man, I'm over here about to have like my own little party myself. All these gems that's being dropped right now. Pia, did you want to add on to that? Because yeah.
I love that. There's very little. I'm going to echo what you said earlier, Oscar, which is just, yeah, amen or ditto or yes or exclamation point or whatever you want to add, whatever word you'd like to add in. But I definitely feel like one of the things that I'm trying to help people engage in also is just understanding how to engage in this continuous process of critical reflection. So even on ourselves, I forgot to mention this, and I know Astrid, I said I might mention this when we had our pre-meeting. I had talked about how one of the things that we use in our field so effectively, we've used a genogram, right? We've used a cultural genogram, right? Ken Hardy came along and I think it was Ken Hardy and Monica McGoldrick at one point wrote that together, did that, the cultural genogram, and then, or Tracy Leslofty, and then the critical genogram. And so the critical genogram is this way to look at prevailing systems of power. And it's not for you to use with your clients, it's for you to use with yourself. I want to map out my family system, and then I want to try to get a sense of like how prevailing systems of power have impacted, or oppression, systems of oppression or systemic racism. Have these things impacted me? And when I tell you the groundbreaking experiences that people have doing this, it's wonderful to see, because we have to understand how to build capacity. And that's part of what Oscar was talking about also, this idea of building capacity for receiving feedback, and also capacity and understanding what it feels like to give feedback. And I don't think that we think enough about our own culturally specific boundaries around that. And it could be as small as like, when I give feedback to someone who's like me, I feel like this in my body. I have this somatic response in my body. And when I give feedback to somebody who's not like me, I feel this in my body. And so that's how I'm also connecting to what you're talking about, Oscar, with the soul wound. Because you may be trying to receive feedback from someone, but because you've had this previous experience, it's challenging to take. And you don't even know what you don't know about it yet. You don't even know why it's challenging to take. And so that's why critical theories are so important. Critical social theories help us to just ask the question. If there was no critical race theory, which was used in the creation of the critically conscious critical genogram, then there wouldn't be students who are doing that. There wouldn't be people who are out there exploring it. If there was no critical consciousness raising exercises in any of our work, how do we check ourselves? Even as a person of color, I identify as an African-American, African-Caribbean, coming from one parent coming from the deep South and one parent coming from the island of Jamaica. how do I interrogate my own practices and my own lens by which I view the world? I have to do that for myself too, even as a person that is not identified as part of a group protected by prevailing systems of power. So
Absolutely.
that's what I have to say to that.
Ah, beautiful. I do want to say this as well, and I know I mentioned it a lot in some of our other events, but I have been very fascinated and focused on this thing of self-care versus soul care. And so talking about soul wounds, here's the therapist hat coming on where I'm just like, there's a difference. There is a difference. But man, Oscar, Pia, this has been amazing. I'm going to kick it over to Rochelle so that we can get some questions to y'all. But this has been an honor to be able to moderate for this. And I'm really interested to see and hear what questions may be popping up. So Rochelle, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Astrid. Wow. Okay. So I gotta be honest, we haven't had a ton of questions roll in. Oh, just popped one up. Okay. So I think people are probably taking a lot of notes and taking things in here. So I'm actually just gonna jump right over to Megan and ask if you would mind jumping on with your camera and your microphone and asking your question. Hi, Megan.
Sure. Hi. I'll just read it. I said, what are ways that we can support newly learning therapists in the field and interns that we work with as clinical supervisors in building this work and building kind of their critical consciousness around intersectionality and a critical race lens? What are some practical ways that I could be doing that, especially as a white queer person? Yeah. Thanks.
I can jump right in.
Thanks, Pia.
If you haven't heard of the text, The Complete Systemic Supervisor, that's a good one. It has some things in there. And there's another text that I would, and have you read Revisioning Family Therapy, Ken Hardy? And so that's part of it. But there's a good chapter in there on supervision. Let me grab it just in case nobody else is. This text, if anyone's seen this or read this, Revisioning Family Therapy, because there's some stuff in here about supervision. But I think the main practice that I would say is doing the reading for yourself. There's so much in our field right now about this sort of third wave, right? This understanding of, okay, where do we go now with this social justice work? And I think, oh my gosh, there are 2 articles that I can share with Billy afterwards, because I have an entire folder of just supervision stuff. So Megan, I'll make sure I get that supervision stuff, like the titles of those articles, because I think that's so important. We have to try to do that type of interrogative practice for ourselves. I created my own little model that I have not researched yet. So it's just for me, but Anthony's probably heard me talk about it, or other people at Antioch. I have this frame that I've sort of created with critical race theory and intersectionality theory at the base, which is sort of a diasporic, values affirming activist healer model in supervision. So that's something that I hope will be a thing. And it's just this idea of like continually checking in with yourself, creating space, but also understanding that there's that the models that are out there, there's so many adaptive resources, but they're coming up every day. So for example, I was just part of a workshop that Ken Hardy hosted on working with couples and race. And Paul Guillory, who's at Berkeley, he just published this emotionally focused therapy with African-American couples. And this was like, I literally got this the day it just was published right now. So this is new, brand new. And so in here, there's a piece that's about like supervision. But I think one of the things that's most important is to do what's authentic for you. So reading about the theory and seeing how you can apply it for me means really looking at how this socially constructed knowledge that we have, because we know social construction and that postmodern thought is in critical race theory, really looking at that and trying to figure out, how do I come into each space with my supervisees, holding that not knowing sort of perspective, but also not being completely out of touch with what their experience is in their community and what they want to bring in. I've seen supervisors who assume that I lived on the Upper West Side because that's where our practice was, in Manhattan. And I'm like, no. So you don't really know what the community context is that I'm dealing with when I go back to my community, right? So there's like all of this rich information that you can start to get through that. I hope that's helpful, but I will share
Yeah.
all of the articles and resources that I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Pia. I want to jump to that next question, which is from Anthony, if possible, kind of take it up to the next level in structure here. We just talked about supervision. Anthony, would you mind asking your question?
Sure. My question is, how can we ensure governing bodies like AMFT incorporate the stance that you all are talking about?
Good question. Anybody want to jump in?
Anyone want to take that before me?
Go ahead, Pia.
I was just gonna say get involved. Get involved. I mean, even in, and I'm going to be so vulnerable and transparent right now in saying that as I was doing my doctoral work, I could not be involved in my New York network as fully, right? But I think one thing to remember is once you go through these spaces and places that we've been with, like the COVID and with everything else, when you emerge out of that, hopefully there'll be a way that folks can draw you back in. I think these types of experiences are definitely the type of thing that can draw folks back into being like, I need to be part of that advocacy, because we tend to get comfortable. It was almost like I forgot that I was part of the network. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get involved. I have to go do stuff again. And so I think that's one way. Any other thoughts for anyone?
I'd say, yeah, make sure you're voting, make sure you're active and being part of advocacy and things like Family Team and joining Lambton projects as well. So state and national levels, 100%. Okay, we're getting a little short on time. I want to make sure we get to Amanda's question. Amanda, are you willing to jump on?
Sure.
There she is.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you both so much. This has just been such a great discussion. So my question, Dr. Harris, you talked about how we need to keep the discussion on us versus other. And so I thought, man, how do you have any other tips or thoughts, anything else more either of you would want to share on how can we, for those that maybe don't see that exists, don't want to, scares them to think that there is the us versus other conversation, to help usher that conversation in of to acknowledge that it is happening, even if it makes them uncomfortable, but how can we help that transition happen?
Right. I think Pia said critical reflection. I recommend Jack Mesereau looking at how he outlined and defined it, and going as a practitioner, I would look at it. And even when I'm working with families or parents and stuff, I would talk about that, because it's interesting. Is it connected to a critical race theory? Absolutely, right? Critically reflecting. I mean, if you think about the tenets of it and all that, it will. But for some individuals who are very much so, I'm going to call it skittish, because that's what's coming to mind. What you can end up doing is lead them on a journey, because there are some individuals who genuinely want to learn new things, but to be honest, sometimes learning new stuff, challenging stuff that your neighbor, your family members may have already told you is bad, can be challenging, right? And so I recommend, leading people on a journey to kind of help them to become, what is the term, woke? To help them become woke in a manner that's going to be, I can't say it's not total without risk, but it's going to be somewhat safe. Another thing that, I do in terms of, and some of our team have used to kind of help individuals in particular who've asked about how can they progress forward, is the intercultural development inventory, right? The IDI. That has been a non-invasive tool that people can end up using, and it's an inventory. It's not accusatory in a manner. It kind of tells the individuals where they are on a continuum in terms of as it relates to acceptance, denial, and there's a few others on there. And then it actually helps them to develop an individual plan about how to improve, so they can do it in privacy if they want and not. And you as a practitioner, it won't put you into a place to where they would automatically assume that you are taking a political stance, because it is amazing. If you say all lives, if you say Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, all those kind of things, people immediately go political, instead of the fact of the matter is all lives should matter, Black lives should matter, any life that exists in the earth should matter. And so that's something that I recommend, because again, through the political sizing of what has happened, it put us into a place to where people are even fearful of even starting the conversation. I hope that helped, Amanda.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
I have a suggestion as well. So for Ken Hardy, and you can find Ken Hardy, for most of you might already know where to find Ken Hardy, but EichenbergInstitute.org. That was actually his mother's maiden name. That's how that name came to be. I asked at one of the Soul Work conferences, like, where is that from? But he really talks about these tasks, these different tasks, learning the tasks of if you're a person of color, learning the task if you're not a person of color. Like, what are your emotional tasks in the discourse? What are some things that you can already have top of mind that you bring in? And so, another thing to think about is curiosity versus comparison. I'm not comparing my experience to yours, because even if we're both from the same background, my experience is not going to be like yours. But if I go to a place of curiosity, that can typically give me a sense of more connection to you and to empathize with what's going on with you.
Yep. Great point, Pia, not to disrupt it, but I'd like to share this quick story if I can. I have I call her a colleague, of which, I'm considered her boss, whatever that means, right? And she ended up reporting to me that a family called her. She don't identify as the popularly categorized cultures of the United States, and she didn't really share too much about her European heritage, so I couldn't place her in time and space. But she shared that someone called her a racist, and it really bothered her to the core. And initially, my response was, okay, someone calls you a racist, so what? But since she was a part of a cult, since she was fighting so hard to develop, to be even more culturally responsive, it really offended her. So I had to go back and to apologize, because to Peter's point, I found myself doing a comparison, right? Real quick. I mean, saying like, I've been called a whole lot of different types of things. Get over it. Let's move forward. And so thank you, Pia, for mentioning that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of, we don't really know the other person's experience, and how where we may have thicker skin from certain experiences, another person like, whoa, that just totally tore through any boundary I felt like I had. So thank you for sharing that story. Okay, so we are at that wrap up moment. I would just like to give you guys could you give me like a one sentence of hope on this? Thinking about things like the next generation that's coming up, and the conversations about them being the most woke, the most informed, a return to a community mentality with this idea and this lens of critical race theory. Can you give me a snippet, if you will, of hope for the future around this?
We're modeling at all times for folks how we want to be treated and how we would like for the world to be. So when we model being shut down, not asking questions, or being immediately closed off to learning new things, that's the world that we're creating for ourselves to be in. And so to really just think about that at all times, and that doesn't mean you're always trying to stretch yourself thin or be so much of the best that you burn out, but to just model the best that you can in every moment, so that you can keep that critical reflection, that critical inquiry and critical reflection going.
Absolutely. And I would say to everyone who's on the line, you are the right person. You are in the right place at this particular time in history, and go and make history.
And thank you for letting me be here. I forgot to say that.
Yes.
Oh, Rochelle, you're on mute.
Sorry, puppies, things happening. Okay. Thank you so much for being here and sharing. For those of you, if you didn't have a question on there and one comes up later, or we didn't get to your question today, please feel free to email wampt@wampt.org and we will forward that as appropriate. I'm going to turn it over to Billy. Again, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Astrid, for moderating, and thank you for being here, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Really, when we all met together with Pia and Oscar before this panel to kind of prepare, what really I think stood out for me was like taking this opportunity to kind of demystify critical race theory for some of us, and then also be able to really have a real conversation about systemic oppression. And so thank you, Pia and Oscar, so much for all the knowledge. You dropped so much knowledge on us today, and I will make sure I gather that from both of you so that we can put a link to all the resources and names of people that we need to do our work with as clinicians onto wampt.org. So look for that. It's usually a week or two before I can get them up there, but definitely, oh, another good one I see Pia holding up. But I want to thank all of you for coming and showing up. We're really excited. This is kind of one of our highest registered events for Building a Better Us. So we were super excited that like we were tapping into something that people thought was important. So thank you for being here and being a part of this organization and all the important work all of you do with clients. Like going back to that community care, like you're all helping our communities in the state of Washington and helping the bigger state, which in turn hopefully helps the bigger picture of our country and so on. So thank you all so much for that. Just one more drop for conference. It's coming up next month, September 24th, 25th. I think this was a good example of kind of breaking down some of those theories or different models and looking at them in new ways and how you can use them in your clinical work. So I think conference is just going to build right off of this momentum in big ways. So thank you, everyone. If you were hoping to get an eval for today's discussion, check your email. It should go out around right about now with a link for the evaluation. If you get that done, try and get it done soon so that you can get your CE relatively soon. I will also, if you know someone who couldn't make it but would be interested, or it's important for them to hear this, I'm going to put this recording on our website as well with a link to those resources, and people can also get a CE for watching the video as well. So thank you so much. If you have any other questions, let me know. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Billy. If you haven't been to the website, go check out the online education resources. All of our Building a Better Us series is uploaded to there at this time, so you can catch up on what you missed. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Tracy and I think Hannah, do either of you have any questions for us? All right, it's just us. I'm going to stop the recording.